We hope you enjoyed this teaching from Christ Church Birmingham. More teaching can be found at www.christchurchbirmingham.org.
Thank you. That looks like a green light. Good morning. So we've got slides. Brilliant. So we're halfway through our series on connections that count from 1 Corinthians. That's the Apostle Paul's first letter to believers in Corinth. And the other talks, I think, are all on YouTube, so do check them out if you've missed any. But today's talk, if we move on to the second slide, is about the single life. And so I feel I should tell you briefly where I'm coming from today. So I'm Sharon. I've lived in Birmingham for 20 years, and I work in a climate charity. And in terms of relationship status, I've never been married. I had a longer relationship in my late teens and have had a few other shorter relationships since then. I would still like to be married to the right person, but I'm grateful not to be married to the wrong person. I'm not entirely content in my single state or without having children, although I appreciated Dan's words the other week where he was talking about other ways of being a father or being a mother in the church. I think that's important. Also, thinking about where Paul is coming from, writing this letter, as he writes the letter, Paul's not married. We don't know for definite from the passage whether he's never been married or whether his wife has died, leaving him a widower. Most scholars seem to think he had previously been married. This would have been expected of members of the Sanhedrin, which we think Paul was. So he speaks very positively in this passage about being single and being unmarried in a way that maybe the world, or maybe the church doesn't. But when you see him grouping himself, he groups himself more with the widows or people that he calls unmarried, which some translations say are widowers, rather than with the virgins, which is a separate passage. So I'm going to be reading from 1 Corinthians. There's quite a bit from chapter 7, starting with verses 7 to 8. Are we on to the screen? If we move on to the next screen, we'll have some verses. And I need some reading glasses. I think I need some half-moon ones, actually, that sort of let me look down my nose and see you and also see the text. But there we are. So reading from 1 Corinthians chapter 7. I wish that all of you were as I am, but each of you has your own gift from God. One has this gift, another has that. Now to the unmarried and the widows, I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried, as I do. But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry. For it is better to marry than to burn with passion. On to the next slide. Now about virgins, so this is a bit later in the passage. About virgins, I have no command from the Lord, but I give a judgment as one who by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. Because of the present crisis, I think that it is good for a man to remain as he is. Are you pledged to a woman? Do not seek to be released. Are you free from such a commitment? Do not look for a wife. But if you do marry, you have not sinned, and if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. But those who marry will face many troubles in this life, and I want to spare you this. What I mean, brothers and sisters, is that the time is short. From now on, those who have wives should live as if they do not, those who mourn as if they did not, those who are happy as if they were not, those who buy something as if it were not theirs to keep, those who use the things of the world as if not engrossed in them. For this world, in its present form, is passing away. Next slide. I would like you to be free from concern. An unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs, how he can please the Lord. But a married man is concerned about the affairs of this world, how he can please his wife. And his interests are divided. An unmarried woman or virgin is concerned about the Lord's affairs. Her aim is to be devoted to the Lord in both body and spirit. But a married woman is concerned about the affairs of this world, how she can please her husband. I am saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, but that you may live in a right way in undivided devotion to the Lord. If anyone is worried that he might not be acting honourably toward the virgin he's engaged to, and if his passions are too strong and he feels he ought to marry, he should do as he wants. He is not sinning. They should get married. Next slide. But the man who has settled the matter in his own mind, who is under no compulsion but has control over his own will, and who has made up his mind not to marry the virgin, this man also does the right thing. So then, he who marries the virgin does right, but he who does not marry her does better. A woman is bound to her husband as long as he lives, but if her husband dies, she is free to marry anyone she wishes, but he must belong to the Lord. In my judgment, she is happier if she stays as she is, and I think that I too have the Spirit of God. So I'm aware as I'm talking this morning that I'm talking to different groups of people, and Paul was as well. So he talks to unmarried people, which probably includes more widows and widowers. He talks to virgins. He knows that he's talking to married people because there's other parts of the passage that will be picked up probably more next week. But I'm aware as well, even within the group of single, there's a number of different groups of people. So we've got the unmarried and single people, but also we may have people who have been divorced or who are separated from a partner. There may be people who are same-sex attracted in the room who think that being single is the only biblical option that's available to them. There may be people who are really happy being single. There may be people who are really unsatisfied with being single and want to marry as soon as possible. And there may be a lot of people in between. So it's a bit of a challenge to bring in all of these groups. And I may not always manage to address all of you, but I want to try here. So I've got a little statistic, if we move on to the next slide, from England and Wales. So looking at the latest census, which was in 2021, 46.9% were married, or in a civil partnership. 9% were divorced, 6% were widowed, leaving 37.9% who had never been married or never registered in a civil partnership. And if you look the way the statistics have changed since 30 years ago in the 1990s, actually that's quite a lot more unmarried people. So the group of married people has decreased in our society. Fewer people are getting married. Now, some of the people who are included in this statistic as single may be in a long-term relationship. But in terms of the changes in our society, and it's different in different ethnic groups, but this is the overall statistic for England and Wales. So Paul talks about people who've never been married and some who've been widowed. A friend of mine recently began dating again after his wife died and was shocked to realise that the last time he'd been dating, John Major had been Prime Minister. A lot has changed in those years since the 90s. And if you're listening to this as a married person and you're feeling like this topic is less relevant to you, I need to break it to you that unless Jesus returns, half of you will probably be single again in this life. And if you're not, it's because you've had an early ticket to meet Jesus and you've been the one who's left someone else behind. So this is a relevant topic to you, and also you all know single people. In terms of people who've got divorced, that may be after some serious harmful behaviour. We want to recognise sometimes divorce is the right choice in a situation. Some people may have children but have never lived with a partner. Some single people may be absolutely convinced that God has the right person for them and that they will get married. And as I think about the two people, friends of mine, who've been perfectly convinced that God had that right person for them, actually both of them are now married. But I know that doesn't always happen. Some people may be convinced that they're fine as they are, single is the right choice for them, but there may be other people in all different places in between. So if we move on to the next slide, I'll tell you where we're going in the talk today. My main points are that whoever you are, you matter to God, and he has good plans for you. I believe that what Paul's saying in this passage, and we'll look a bit at some of the key points that he's made, is that your relationship with him is the most important thing, but that it's also really important that we treat each other properly. I'm going to pick up how both Paul, but also Jesus, understood what it was like to be single, and they want us to flourish as single people. And then we'll also look at how we can prayerfully seek godly connections, not just romantic relationships, but connections with all sorts of people that will help us fulfill this purpose that God has for each one of us. Now, we didn't consult beforehand, although she had seen these main points that I'd got. But I was going to start with some verses from Jeremiah, which Tanika has already read to us this morning. Have we got there? Brilliant. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. And this is what I believe God is saying to all of us. He wants all of us to seek him with all of our hearts. In this prophecy in Jeremiah, just the verses beforehand, God has been saying to them, you're in Babylon, you're in exile, settle down there and plant gardens and get married and have children. But then he also talks about when they will come back from exile. And this is his promise for them, that he has good plans for them and that they need to be seeking him with all their hearts. So in terms of priorities in life, what does Paul really want for his readers? Why is he talking about this issue? We think he was probably asked a question by the church in Corinth about whether everybody should be celibate always. And so that's probably the sort of question that he's addressing here. But his top priorities, if we look at verses 32 and 35 again, his top priority is that we are free from concerns, that we can focus fully on God's affairs and live right in undivided devotion to him. Following Jesus, serving him, all of us need to make this our top priority. And how do we do this? What does it look like? It's going to be different for different people. But to follow Jesus, we need to know him. And to get to know him better, we need to be reading the Bible. We need to be praying, spending time with him, serving others through the church, through other worthwhile activities, and doing the work that he's called us to do. So in terms of my calling on what I feel God has called me to do at this time, working for a climate charity is part of what I feel like God has called me to do. This is an important thing that I need to spend time doing. But for those of us who are married alongside this or have children, we also have responsibilities to our spouse and to our children to be caring for them and their needs and listening to where the Lord is leading them as well. So there are many ways that being single leaves us freer to pursue a particular call on our life. If we feel like God is calling us to move, we feel like God is calling us to spend some time studying, if we feel like he wants us to live in a particular country or follow God in a new, different way. Someone like Paul, who we know was called to travel, to be an apostle, to cover a wide geographical area, to be a father to many in the faith, it was probably somewhat easier for him that he wasn't leaving a wife and children behind. We don't know again about children, but he doesn't mention them. Children in flesh rather than children in faith. So God wants all of us to have a meaningful life full of purpose and joy in him. He loves you. Whoever you are part of the bride of Christ, whether you are single or whether you're married or whether it's complicated. But maybe the world says different things, and we need to contrast what Paul's saying here to what the world says. So if we move on to the next slide, what does the world say? Maybe the world says that being in a romantic relationship, having a good sex life is the highest form of happiness, it's the top priority for everyone, that a single person cannot be whole or fulfilled on their own. Can we move on to the next slide? Does anybody recognise the GIF on the left? Yes. No life without wife. Where's that from?
Is it Brian?
Yes. So not all my cultural references are from 20 years ago, but getting some fresh prints in the other week give me permission to draw from a film from 2004. So 20 years ago, it's an updated version of Pride and Prejudice set in Asian families. And actually, if you look at the statistics that I looked at earlier, within Asian families, far more people are married, even now, than are single or divorced or widowed. So in certain cultures, it may be even stronger that you have to marry, you must marry, and that you have no life without it. Maybe there's an expectation, finding a romantic partner, having a beautiful wedding and a happy ever after with a strong, handsome, sensitive, intelligent man is the ultimate dream. Maybe we have unrealistic dreams and fantasies of ideal men as much as ideal women, and they might be affected by the culture and all sorts of stuff that we watch. Alternatively, and I have seen this argument that in the youngest generation, Gen Z, or they're not the youngest, but the youngest who are maybe looking at relationships, maybe all about main character energy. And actually, it's about being the centre of your life. And actually, maybe being single is okay, so long as you are the centre of your life. And actually, even that doesn't line up with what Paul's talking about, and what Jesus says is that Jesus should be the centre of our life. So maybe you're happier being single because it's all about you, but that also doesn't match up with what's in the passage. And then maybe some of us have witnessed different attitudes in the church as well. If we move on to the next slide, what has the church said about being single? I've got another image. Do you recognise the one on the left? This is another TV reference. It's not one that I know so well, but clearly anybody knows, right? Really relevant. Well, it's from the Gilmore Girls, which I understand is having a bit of a renaissance, maybe. So one character saying to another, "Don't you want to get married? You must want to get married." And then anybody recognise the guy on the right? This is my cutting-edge youth culture reference. No, we don't know him either. So this guy is a gamer called Mars, and he's saying, "Oh, you poor thing." Now, he's probably saying it with some sarcasm, probably because something's gone wrong in a game, to be honest. But maybe that's something that you witness in the church as well. Maybe people pity you if you're single. I've heard different people talk about how churches maybe don't know how to deal with them as a single person. Maybe people in church in the past have been treated as a threat to married couples. Maybe some opportunities for ministry have only been made open to married couples or to men. Maybe some people in church seem desperate to matchmake single people into couples, whether that's their preference or not. Some people also envy the freedom that single people have. One married friend who's not in the room, who will remain nameless, seemed to think that actually single life was much easier, that she'd much prefer that. So there are good things about being single. There's this freedom to be single-minded in our calling from the Lord. We're freed from a number of challenges and trials. In verse 26 in the passage, Paul talks about a present crisis. In this present crisis, I think it's good for you to stay as you are. And I've looked at some different scholars on that, and the decision probably seems to be that it was a time of famine that they were experiencing. So if you can imagine in a time of famine, it is easier to meet your own needs as a single person and then prioritise others, whereas as a married person, then you need to be concerned, has your spouse got enough food? Have your children got enough food? All of the other relationships and family, and then you might get onto the family, wider community. So I think that was the sort of challenge in some difficult situations. Being single might be easier. Perhaps it's obvious, but as our example, Jesus was single. He still had deep friendships with his disciples and a powerful awareness of the Father's love for him, but he was single. And I'm going to look at the next slide. Look at some verses from Hebrews, which talk about Jesus and how he understands the challenges and weaknesses that we have. It's from Hebrews 4, it says, "Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." So we don't know from the scripture whether Jesus was sexually attracted to any of the women or men that he spent time with, But if we look at these verses and we take them literally, that says that he's been tempted in every way that we are, it's possible. But we also know that he did not sin. He stayed true to his Father's plan to go to the cross, to suffer and to die free. There we are. He understands our struggles and he made a way for our forgiveness from any wrongdoing. So thinking about some of the things that are harder about being single, Paul talks about burning with passion, might be other people's expectations or our own expectations. Maybe we feel lonely or isolated. Maybe we just feel like we're not top of anybody's list. Maybe we always have to be the one who reaches out to other people. Maybe we feel left behind or jealous. Maybe we're not having children in the way that we expected, either not at all, or not our own children, or having to raise them without a partner alongside us that we expected. Maybe if our relationships ended, maybe we feel abandoned or let down. Maybe we're grieving what we had. Maybe we're grieving what we never had. Some things, just practical things, are more expensive as a single person. Within the passage, Paul doesn't give really hard and fast rules from Jesus. He's trying to share wisdom, but he gives quite a lot of freedom for single people to choose to marry, or especially if they are burning with passion, or if they feel they're not acting honourably to the person that they're in a relationship with, or even if they just feel it's right to marry. And he stresses that a widow may marry again, anyone that they wish, so long as he shares her faith, or she shares his faith. In my experience, it's not quite as, you can marry. It's not quite that simple, in my experience. Probably I'm being more picky than Paul thought the average woman would be. There's been nobody who's wanted a relationship with me in my life. But I'm aware that things are different in terms of the other opportunities that I have and have had to study and to have a career. I'm grateful for these opportunities. Also, in the world technologically today, we can meet people from all over the world. That's quite a lot of people to try and find the right one. It's not just like, here's my village, there's these two people who are single, this one's got a good relationship with the Lord, that's the right person for me. There is a world of people out there. And maybe other people have had quite a different experience to me and have had lots of people wanting to be in a relationship with them, different challenge to me, but they've always got to discern their intentions or manage a dating schedule alongside other work and social commitments. Maybe their life is full of other people wanting to marry them, and maybe they need to hear Paul's other advice, that if they have peace about staying single, go ahead and stay single. That is also a good thing. I guess my overall thought is what helps us to serve the Lord best. Most of us need some sort of companionship, some sort of connections. There are physical and emotional benefits of healthy touch and interactions. We do need a hug, most of us, and some of us find those harder to come by than others. We need encouragement in our journey with God. Over the years, I've really valued some friendships with married couples who have included me in family outings and celebrations, helped me to feel part of God's family. Some young single people may enjoy the chance to help with kids' work or childcare or babysitting. Others might find that difficult or feel that it's not in their gifting. But we benefit from having connections to all sorts of people, all generations, to share wisdom, to be family together, and make sure no one's left to cope on their own. In terms of perhaps what single people could do differently if they're finding it a challenge, is to find someone mature in faith to share our struggles with in this area. If we're struggling but we're pretending to be fine, that's rarely healthy. Maybe that we need some sort of time to grieve, return our focus to how to follow Jesus in whatever relationship state we find ourselves in. If you're keen to meet a potential partner, then you probably need to be taking the opportunities to meet Christians, get to know them, rather than just expecting Mr. or Ms. Right to miraculously appear. If you're feeling lonely or isolated, then we can pray about that, but it's also really good to reach out to a trusted friend and seek some more connections. When I was first in Birmingham, I met up with an elderly lady once a week through a befriending charity. And actually, we both really benefited from this. And when I'm old, I hope that someone will reach out to me like this, especially if I still don't have a spouse or children of my own. I said at the start that I'm not fully content in my single state, and I'm not sure if I ever will be in this life. But there's a song by Phil Wickham, which is called You're Beautiful, which ends up with the verse, "When we arrive at eternity's shore, where death is just a memory and tears are no more, we'll enter in as the wedding bells ring. Your bride will come together and we'll sing, You're beautiful." And this draws really clearly from Revelation 19, which is on the next slide. It talks about where the church, Jesus' bride, comes to be united with him for eternity. And as I was listening to this song, it struck me that at that point in eternity, I will be content. Whether or not I ever got married in this life, I won't be wishing at that point that I had a nice husband or a good sex life. And that at that moment, Jesus will be so much more important than all of that. And none of us will be married at that point. We'll all be united with Jesus as part of that bride of Christ. And I think what Paul's inviting us in this passage is to enter that eternity sooner. Let that start now. A few suggestions perhaps for what married people could do differently. And I know some people have all sorts of different experiences. I know married life has a whole raft of its own challenges, and maybe next week's sermon will address more of those. But in terms of your relationships with single people, please do take opportunities to build connections with people from different walks of life and recognise what they can contribute to your lives too. As we're a community, that means leaning on others sometimes. And when family life is tough, there are others who would love to come alongside you and share some of those burdens and at the same time feel less alone themselves. We all need to be cheering each other on. And this is the last verse that I want to draw on, is from Hebrews chapter 10. It says, "Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." So we all need to be encouraging and cheering each other on, supporting each other in our walk with the Lord and following the purposes that he has for us. So a final slide and a quick recap. Don't be defined by your single or your married state. You are a precious child of God, and he loves you. You matter to him. He has good plans for you. We need to prioritize our relationship with him, but we also need to treat our brothers and sisters in Christ with honor and care. So if you think you're treating the person you're dating wrongly, what is the honorable thing to do? In some cases, it might be to get married. In other cases, it might be to respectfully end the relationship or make some big changes. A couple needs to be pulling in the same direction. Then they can be stronger. If you're pulling in different directions, following different callings, takes neither of you where you're meant to go. In 2 Corinthians 6, verse 14, Paul says to the Corinthians later, "Do not be yoked together with unbelievers," and talks about the challenges of that. If as far as it's up to us, we need to choose to be united with people who are going in the same direction, pulling together with us. And Paul and Jesus, as I've said, both understood what it means to be single, the challenges of single life. They want to see us flourishing. And so if you're struggling with this, I say take it to Jesus. He does understand. That doesn't necessarily take all the problems away, but he is with us in it, like the My Lighthouse song that we looked at earlier in the morning. And finally, let's spur one another on towards those love and good deeds. Let's be reaching out, building new friendships, new mentoring relationships, new godly connections in all the different kinds, which will help us to fulfill that purpose that God is calling us to pursue.